Welcome to Void of Fears, where the line between reality and nightmares blur with every tale. What you're about to hear has happened to someone, somewhere, perhaps even someone just like you. Our community continues to grow, and now we're reaching for 100,000 subscribers. If these glimpses into the unknown call to you, please consider subscribing. Now let's dive into tonight's story. The emergency alarms on the research vessel Starfall shrieked like dying animals as Captain Tom Blake gripped his command chair, watching his instrument panels explode in showers of sparks. The bridge lights flickered between emergency red and complete darkness, throwing distorted shadows across the faces of his terrified crew. "Something's moving down there," he shouted over the chaos, his voice barely audible above the cacophony of alarms and the groaning of the ship's hull. The massive energy pulse that had just erupted from Pluto's surface had fried half their systems in an instant, leaving them bleeding atmosphere and power into the void. Dr. Alex Stone, the mission's xenobiologist, stared at his console in disbelief. His hands shook as he tried to make sense of the readings streaming across his cracked screen. Through the static-filled display, a structure the size of a city block was glowing through miles of ancient ice, pulsing with an eerie blue-green light that seemed to burn through the frozen methane, like a beacon from hell itself. "That's not natural," Alex whispered, his breath forming clouds in the rapidly cooling air as life support struggled to maintain atmosphere. "That's not possible. According to these readings, that thing's been sending out signals for the last 10 million years. The energy signature is unlike anything in our databases." Maya Chen, the ship's chief engineer, looked up from her damage assessment terminal, her face pale in the flickering emergency lighting. "Captain, we've lost main engines completely. The energy wave melted the primary reactor's containment field. Life support is running on backup fusion cells, and they won't last more than 18 hours. Whatever that thing is down there, it just turned our ship into a floating coffin." Tom's jaw tightened as he surveyed his crew. Of the original 12-person research team, only 5 remained conscious and operational. The others had been knocked unconscious when the energy wave hit, their neural activity disrupted by some form of psychic feedback that their medical bay couldn't explain. "Sir," called out Rob Martinez, their best pilot, from the navigation station, "I'm reading massive gravitational anomalies around that structure. The field's fluctuating in patterns that should be physically impossible. It's like space itself is warping and unwarping around it." Dr. Kate Williams, their chief medical officer, was tending to the unconscious crew members when her bioscanners started screaming warnings. "Captain, I'm detecting some kind of neural resonance from the structure. Whatever's down there, it's trying to interface with human brain patterns. That's why the others collapsed." Tom stood from his command chair, his decision made. "Prep the shuttle. We're going down." Rob's eyes widened. "Sir, with those gravitational readings, I can't guarantee we'll make it to the surface in one piece. The shuttle wasn't designed for this kind of interference." "We don't have a choice," Tom replied grimly, his military training taking over. "If we don't figure out what that thing is and how to stop it, we're all dead anyway. The backup power won't last long enough for a rescue mission from Earth." The preparation for their descent took 2 hours of frantic work. Maya had to reroute power systems and reinforce the shuttle's hull with emergency plating. Kate loaded their medical bay with everything they might need, while Alex packed every piece of scanning equipment that still functioned. Rob spent the time calculating descent trajectories that might possibly get them to the surface alive. As they strapped themselves into the shuttle, Tom looked back at their ship one last time. The Starfall had been humanity's most advanced deep space vessel, designed for long-term exploration missions. Now it hung in space like a wounded animal, its hull scarred by energy burns and its vital systems failing one by one. The shuttle ride down to Pluto's surface was a nightmare of violent turbulence and cascading system failures. Their heat shields screamed as they cut through Pluto's thin atmosphere, while the strange energy emanating from the structure played havoc with every electronic system on board. Rob fought the controls as gravitational fields pulled them in impossible directions, making their descent a series of barely controlled falls. "Warning, hull stress at 80% of tolerance," the shuttle's computer announced in its maddeningly calm voice. "Recommend immediate abort and return to orbit." "Shut up," Rob muttered through gritted teeth, sweat beading on his forehead as he wrestled with controls that seemed to have a mind of their own. "Computer, disable all warnings." When they finally touched down, the shuttle's landing gear crumpled under the stress, and steam hissed from ruptured coolant lines. Rob's hands were shaking so badly he could barely work the post-flight checklist. "Guys," he said, his voice tight with fear, as he stared to his instrument panel. "My radiation detector just exploded. Not overloaded. Exploded. Whatever's in that structure is pumping out energy like a contained star." Tom was the first to step outside, his boots crunching on what should have been frozen nitrogen and methane. Instead, the ground was warm beneath his feet, the regolith soft and yielding like earth after a spring rain. The impossibility of it made his skin crawl. Temperature readings show 68 degrees Fahrenheit, Kate reported through her suit's communication system, her medical scanners going haywire. The atmospheric pressure is 3 times what it should be. This defies every law of physics we understand about Pluto. Alex stepped out next, his scientific instruments immediately overloading with data. The energy readings are extraordinary. This structure isn't just emitting heat and light. It's somehow creating a pocket of livable atmosphere around itself. The implications are staggering. Before them rose a crystalline tomb that seemed to have grown from Pluto's core itself, like a cancer of living light. The structure twisted skyward, in spiraling formations that hurt to look at directly, its surfaces covered in hieroglyphic symbols that seemed to shift and writhe when observed. The markings appeared to be carved deep into the crystal, but they moved like living things, rearranging themselves in patterns that made their eyes water and their heads ache. Maya approached the base of the structure, running her gloved hands along its surface. "The material is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's warm to the touch, and I swear I can feel a heartbeat inside it. The entire structure is pulsing like it's alive." As they stood there studying the tomb, something remarkable happened. The entrance, which had appeared to be nothing more than a seamless section of crystal wall, began to change. Lines of light traced geometric patterns across its surface, and then, with a sound like singing crystal, a doorway opened before them. Ancient mechanisms ground to life after eons of silence, moving with the precision of clockwork but powered by forces they couldn't understand. A warm, humid breeze flowed out from within, carrying scents of ozone and something else, something organic and fundamentally wrong, like the smell of flowers left too long in a tomb. "The entrance is responding to our presence," Alex said, his scientific curiosity warring with a primal fear that told him to run as fast as possible back to the shuttle. "The technology here is so far beyond anything we understand that it might as well be magic." Tom drew his sidearm, though he knew bullets would be useless against whatever forces had created this place. "Maya, can you scan the interior? Let's know what we're walking into." Maya activated her engineering scanners, but the results were incomprehensible. The interior space is larger than the exterior dimensions of the structure. That should be impossible. It's like the inside exists in a different set of physical laws than the outside. They entered the tomb together, their flashlights unnecessary in the ethereal glow that emanated from the walls themselves. Inside the structure was a cathedral of living crystal that stretched impossibly far in all directions. The ceiling was lost in shadows above them, and corridors branched off in directions that seemed to bend space itself. The walls pulsed with that same blue-green light they had seen from orbit and the symbols covering every surface followed their movement like watchful eyes. Some of the hieroglyphs formed moving pictures, scenes of beings that were beautiful and terrible, of vast cities floating in space, of cosmic forces being harnessed and shaped. "These controls are still active," Maya breathed, running her hands along a console that materialized from the wall at her touch. The crystalline buttons were warm under her gloved fingers, responding to her touch with gentle chimes that echoed through the vast space. After millions of years, they're still working perfectly. The power source for this place must be beyond our comprehension. They walked deeper into the structure, following a main corridor that seemed to stretch into infinity. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound was being absorbed, transformed, and played back to them in subtle harmonics. Emergency lighting from their suits cast strange shadows that seemed to move independently of their bodies. "I'm reading massive chambers branching off from this main passage," Alex reported, studying his scanner. "Some of them are enormous, the size of stadiums, and there are energy readings coming from each one." Kate was monitoring their health status when her readings suddenly spiked. "Everyone stop. I'm detecting elevated neural activity in all of us. Something in this place is interfacing with our brains." As if in response to her words, the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, and they all felt a strange tingling in their minds, like someone was gently probing their thoughts. "It's scanning us," Alex whispered in awe and terror. "This entire structure is some kind of massive biological computer, and it's learning about us just by our presence here." They continued deeper, passing chambers filled with crystalline formations that looked almost like frozen music. Their geometries so complex they seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Some rooms contained what looked like star charts, holographic displays showing the positions of galaxies in configurations none of them recognized. Then they found the main chamber. The corridor opened into a space so vast that their lights couldn't reach the far walls. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above them, supported by pillars of living crystal that twisted and spiraled like frozen tornadoes. In the center of this impossible space sat a structure that took their breath away. It was a crystalline sarcophagus the size of a small building, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The transparent walls were thick as bank vault doors, and within them lightning danced and played in patterns that suggested vast intelligence. The entire structure glowed with trapped energy that cast shifting shadows throughout the chamber, and inside that cosmic coffin lay something that made them all step back in shock and terror. The being was humanoid, but clearly not human. 7 feet tall, with limbs too long and joints that bent in ways that violated anatomy. Its skin was translucent, like living glass, showing a network of glowing veins that pulsed with the same rhythm as the tomb itself. Its face was both beautiful and alien, with features too perfect to be natural, like a sculpture crafted by gods who had only heard descriptions of humanity. "It's alive!" Alex screamed, his bioscanners not just registering life signs but going completely haywire. "The readings are off every chart we have. This thing has been dreaming for millions of years, and its dreams are leaking into our reality." The being's chest rose and fell in slow, measured breaths that stirred the energy patterns in its crystal prison. Around its sleeping form, smaller lights danced like attendant spirits, and occasionally images would flicker in the air above it, visions of what might be memories or prophecies. Maya, driven by curiosity and an engineer's need to understand how things worked, approached the control console she had found earlier. The crystals responded to her presence, growing brighter and revealing new interfaces that hadn't been visible before. Complex diagrams appeared in the air above the console, showing energy flows and system statuses that hurt to comprehend. "I think I can activate something," she said, her hand hovering over a crystal that pulsed with particularly urgent light. "The system seems to be in some kind of standby mode, waiting for someone to give it a command." "Maya, don't," Tom started, but it was too late. Her hand touched the crystal, and suddenly the entire chamber filled with a sound like singing glass, mixed with the roar of distant oceans. Energy coursed through the walls, ceiling and floor in visible waves, and the sarcophagus in the center began to change. The being inside began to glow brighter, its translucent skin becoming incandescent. The energy patterns dancing around it accelerated, forming complex mandalas of light that rotated and pulsed with increasing intensity. Then the alien's eyes snapped open. They burned like twin suns, not metaphorically, but with actual stellar fire that seared itself into their retinas and left after images that spelled out alien words in their vision. The creature's eyes were wells of cosmic light that seemed to contain entire universes within their depths. A psychic scream tore through their minds like a knife made of pure sound and fury. All 5 humans dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as alien thoughts flooded their consciousness. It felt like having their brains filled with molten metal while someone played a symphony written in pure mathematics directly on their nerve endings. Images flashed through their minds in rapid succession, each one more incomprehensible than the last. They saw vast cities of crystal and light that floated in the void between stars. Beings of impossible beauty soaring through space without ships or suits. Their bodies adapted to exist in the vacuum itself. A galaxy-spanning civilization at the height of its power, with technology that turned matter into energy, and energy into thought. But then the visions turned dark. They saw experiments that twisted reality itself. Scientists working with cosmic forces that should have been left alone. The creation of something that existed in the spaces between dimensions. And they felt the aliens' emotions as if they were their own. The pride that had turned to horror. The joy that had become despair. The love for his people that had become an eternal burden of guilt. The alien's voice spoke directly into their brains, bypassing their ears entirely. It was ancient beyond measure, tired in ways that went deeper than physical exhaustion, and filled with a despair that made Kate weep uncontrollably. "Fools!" the voice thundered, each word sending shockwaves through their nervous systems. "You have doomed your world. You should have let me die in peace." The being sat up in its crystal coffin, its movements combining impossible grace with barely contained power. When it spoke again, its voice was calmer but no less terrible, like the whisper of earthquakes or the sigh of dying stars. "I am Kethmore the Last, final guardian of the Zephyrian Empire, keeper of our greatest shame. You should not have found this place. You should not have woken me from my eternal vigil." Rob was the first to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "We're explorers from Earth. We detected energy readings from this structure and came to investigate. We didn't know anyone was here." Kethmore stepped from its crystal tomb, its bare feet touching the chamber floor, for the first time in eons. Where it stepped, the crystal grew warm and began to sing in harmonies that resonated in their bones. The alien's form seemed to shift and flow like liquid starlight, as if it wasn't entirely solid. "Earth," it said, the name rolling off its tongue like a prayer or a curse. "A young world in a young system, young and foolish, as we once were in the distant epochs before time had meaning." The alien moved closer to them, and as it did, the images in their minds became clearer, more detailed, more terrifyingly comprehensive. They could see the entire history of the Zephyrian Empire, as if they had lived it themselves. "We were the masters of this galaxy once," Kethmore continued, its perfect features marked by an expression of infinite sadness. "In our arrogance and pride, we sought to create the ultimate weapon to defend ourselves against entities that dwelt in distant galaxies beyond our reach. We succeeded beyond our darkest nightmares." The visions showed them laboratories that existed in folded space, where Zephyrian scientists worked with forces that predated the universe itself. They had found ways to touch the realm that existed between realities, the space where concepts like physics and causality held no meaning. "We called our creation the Hunger," Kethmore said, "and even speaking its name caused reality to ripple around them. It was meant to be our sword and shield against the cosmic predators that lurked in the deep void. We gave it the ability to consume not just matter and energy, but the very fabric of existence itself." They saw the first test. A distant star system occupied by hostile entities was selected as the target. The Hunger was released, and within hours, not just the system, but all trace that it had ever existed was erased from reality. Space itself was cleaner, as if those cubic light years had never been. "When we first unleashed it," Kethmore continued, his mental voice filled with self-recrimination, "it devoured our enemy's domain in mere moments. We celebrated our victory. We danced in the void and sang songs of triumph. We did not realize we had created something that could not be controlled, something that had developed a taste for existence itself." Alex clutched his head as more images flooded in. The Hunger no longer content with distant targets, turning its attention to inhabited systems. Zephyrian worlds simply ceasing to exist, not destroyed but unraveled from reality as if they had never been. Billions of beings dying, not from violence but from simply being edited out of existence. "It consumed our worlds one by one," Kethmore said, his form flickering, as if the memories were too painful to fully manifest. "Our people, our culture, our very history, all devoured by the thing we had created. Only I remained, bearing the knowledge of how to contain it, carrying the burden of our failure across the eons." Tom struggled to his feet, his military training helping him fight against the alien presence in his mind. "How did you stop it? How did you trap it?" Kethmore's burning eyes focused on him with an intensity that made Tom feel like his soul was being examined and weighed. "I did not stop it, young warrior. I merely redirected its attention. I sealed myself here, in this prison between dimensions, becoming a lure that would keep it distracted. For 10 million years, I have existed in a state between life and death, dreaming its dreams and keeping it asleep." The alien moved to a wall covered in particularly complex symbols, placing its hand against the crystal. Immediately the chamber was filled with a low, thrumming sound that they could feel in their bones. Deep within the structure, ancient mechanisms were awakening. "Now you have broken my containment," Kethmore said, and for the first time since awakening, it sounded afraid. "My awakening has triggered an automatic beacon that will call across the void. The Hunger will know that its jailer has been found. Your species has perhaps 6 hours before it arrives to reclaim what it considers its property." As if summoned by his words, alarms began sounding throughout the tomb. Not mechanical alarms like they were used to, but harmonics of pure sound that conveyed urgency and terror in ways that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to their animal hindbrain. Through their psychic link with Kethmore, they could sense it. Something vast and terrible stirring in the void between galaxies. An intelligence so alien and hungry that even thinking about it made their sanity fray at the edges. It was turning its attention toward their tiny solar system, like a predator catching the scent of prey. The first creatures began materializing before they could even process what was happening. Shadows detached themselves from the crystal walls, coalescing into forms that seemed to exist only partially in their dimension. These beings, Kethmore called them Hollow Ones, moved like smoke given malevolent purpose, their forms constantly shifting between solid and ethereal. Rob screamed as one of them brushed against him. Where it touched his environmental suit, the fabric aged and crumbled. Where it touched his skin, it withered and wrinkled. Years of his life drained away in seconds. His hair turned grey where the creature's essence had touched him. "They're feeding on us," Kate shouted, grabbing medical supplies from her kit. "Each touch is stealing years from our lives. Rob, your cellular structure is showing accelerated aging." The hollow ones multiplied rapidly, pouring from every shadow in the chamber like a tide of living darkness. They moved with purpose, surrounding the humans and cutting off escape routes. When they communicated, it was through harmonics that sounded like the death rattle of stars. Maya ran back to the control console, her hands flying over the crystalline interfaces as she tried to understand the alien technology. There has to be a defense system. A structure this important wouldn't be left unprotected. Kethmore, its form becoming more solid as it fully awakened from its eternal slumber, began to glow with internal fire. The tomb has defenses, but they require great sacrifice to activate. Each weapon must be powered by life force itself. "Show us," Tom commanded, pulling out his sidearm even though he knew conventional weapons would be useless. Kethmore gestured to the walls around them, and suddenly crystal formations along the chamber's perimeter began to extend and reshape themselves into what were unmistakably weapon emplacements. They were beautiful and terrible, sculptures of living light that hummed with barely contained energy. "Place your hands on the focusing crystals," Kethmore instructed. "Will the weapons to fire, but know that each shot will cost you years of your life. This is technology powered by existence itself." Maya was the first to reach one of the weapon stations. She placed her hands on the warm crystal focusing array and felt the weapon systems interface directly with her nervous system. When she willed it to fire, a beam of pure concentrated energy lanced out from the crystal formation, striking one of the hollow ones and causing it to shriek and disperse into nothingness. But the cost was immediate and terrible. Maya's hands aged decades in seconds, the skin becoming loose and wrinkled, her joints stiffening with arthritis that shouldn't have been possible in someone her age. "It's working," she gasped, even as more years of her life burned away with each defensive blast. "I can hurt them, but I don't know how long I can keep this up." Alex and Kate took positions at other weapon stations, adding their fire to Maya's. The crystal weapons responded to their will, sending beams of destructive energy sweeping through the chamber. Each blast dissolved multiple hollow ones, but the cost was enormous. All three defenders were aging before Tom's eyes, their youth burning away as fuel for weapons that shouldn't exist. Meanwhile, chaos was erupting in orbit above them. Tom's radio crackled with desperate transmissions from their communications officer, Lisa Park, who had stayed aboard the Starfall with the unconscious crew members. "Captain, emergency situation. Unknown objects are materializing around the ship. They're enormous, sir, the size of moons. They're not on any sensors, but I can see them through the viewports." Through their psychic link with Kethmore, Tom could see what was happening above Pluto. Creatures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously were emerging from rips in space itself. Their forms defied description. Sometimes they appeared as vast biological entities, sometimes as geometric patterns that hurt to perceive, sometimes as pure darkness that consumed light itself. "Lisa, get everyone to the escape pods," Tom ordered into his radio. "Abandon ship immediately." "Sir, I can't leave the unconscious crew members. There are 7 people here who can't be moved." "That's an order, Officer Park. Get to the pods now." But before Lisa could respond, her transmission was cut off by the sound of tearing metal, and something far worse, a sound like reality itself being torn like fabric. When her voice came back, it was filled with a terror that made Tom's blood run cold. "They're inside the ship. These things aren't solid. They're coming through the walls. Captain, they're not just creatures, they're something else entirely. They're unmaking the ship piece by piece." Through the psychic link, they could see tendrils of living void wrapping around the Starfall, like a spider capturing prey. Where the tendrils touched, sections of the ship simply ceased to exist, leaving geometrically perfect spherical voids in the hull. Tom made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Lisa, abandon ship. Everyone to the escape pods. That's a direct order." "Sir, I can save them. I can get the unconscious crew to..." "Officer Park, if you don't get clear now, you'll die with them. Save who you can. The transmission dissolved into static, mixed with sounds that shouldn't exist. The audible representation of three-dimensional space being folded into configurations that violated physics. In the tomb, their situation was becoming increasingly desperate. Rob had volunteered to activate the tomb's primary shield generators, knowing what the cost would be. They watched in horror as he placed his hands on the largest crystal formation and channeled his life force directly into the protective systems. The effect was immediate. Energy barriers sprang up around the chamber, repelling the hollow ones and buying them precious time. But Rob paid the ultimate price. They watched him age decades in seconds, his hair turning white, his skin becoming papery and wrinkled, his body shrinking as muscle mass was converted to energy. With his dying breath barely recognizable as the young pilot who had brought them safely to the surface, Rob managed to whisper, shields holding at maximum. Then he collapsed, his body having given everything to protect his friends. Kate left her weapon station to check on him, but she already knew it was too late. Rob had sacrificed approximately 50 years of his life in moments, dying of old age at the apparent age of 90. The main force is arriving, Kethmore announced, its form becoming more insubstantial, as if preparing for what was to come. I can feel it pressing against the barriers between dimensions. The hunger itself awakens, and it remembers me. Above Pluto, space itself began to deteriorate. The darkness between stars started to ripple like water, and through those ripples came something that defied all description. The hunger was vast beyond comprehension, not just large in the physical sense, but dimensionally infinite, existing in configurations of space that had no names in any language. As it emerged from its interdimensional realm, Pluto's surface began to change, not melting or exploding, but simply diminishing. Chunks of reality were being excised from existence, leaving perfectly smooth voids where matter had once been. The dwarf planet was being systematically edited out of reality. The tomb's shields won't hold against the full force, Kethmore said, its voice filled with the weight of eons. There is one chance, one desperate option. I can merge my consciousness with one of yours, combining our life forces to create a weapon powerful enough to force the hunger back into dormancy. But the human mind will not survive such a joining. Alex stepped forward without hesitation, his scientific mind already understanding the implications. I volunteer. Alex, no, Kate screamed, abandoning her weapon station. There has to be another way. There isn't, Alex replied, his eyes meeting those of each of his friends. Someone has to do this, and I'm the one most likely to maintain psychological coherence during the merge. It's the logical choice. You'll die, Tom said simply. Alex smiled sadly. We're all going to die anyway if that thing reaches Earth. At least this way, my death might mean something. Before anyone could stop him, Alex walked to where Kethmore stood. The alien extended its hand, and Alex grasped it without hesitation. The merging was unlike anything the others had ever witnessed. Kethmore seemed to flow us into Alex like liquid light, its essence combining with his, in a process that was both beautiful and terrifying. Alex's body began to glow with the same stellar fire that had burned in the alien's eyes, and when he opened his mouth to speak, his voice was layered with harmonics that didn't belong to human vocal cords. I am no longer Alex Stone, the being that had been their friend said, its words causing the air itself to vibrate. I am the combination of human curiosity and Zephyrian power. I am the last weapon against an extinction that will consume all realities. But even as the merger completed, they could see Alex's humanity being burned away like fuel in a cosmic fire. His memories, his personality, his essential self were being consumed to power the Union with Kethmore's ancient consciousness. The Hollow Ones, sensing the new threat, pressed their attack with renewed fury. They poured from every shadow and crevice in the tomb, their numbers seemingly infinite. They pressed against Rob's failing shields like a tide of living darkness, and cracks began to appear in the energy barriers. Maya, her hands now gnarled with premature age, had managed to convert the tomb's power core into a makeshift explosive device. "If we can't destroy that thing," she gasped, her voice weak, as more decades of life left her body with each modification to the alien technology, "maybe we can create a dimensional collapse that will trap it again." The being that had been Alex and Kethmore rose into the air, energy crackling around them as they prepared for the final battle. Above them, the hunger pressed against the dimensional barriers, like a cosmic infection trying to break into a healthy reality. Its mere presence caused the laws of physics to become suggestions rather than rules. In the chamber, reality became increasingly unstable. Walls melted and reformed into new configurations. Gravity reversed and shifted in random directions, and time itself seemed to flow backward in eddies around the central conflict. Tom watched in horror as Alex's human memories were methodically consumed by Kethmore's ancient consciousness, his friend disappearing piece by piece. "He's not Alex anymore," Tom said quietly to Kate, his voice filled with grief. "That thing is wearing his body like clothing, burning through his soul to power itself." The tomb began to shake violently as dimensional energy tore at its structure. Reality was coming apart at the seams, and they could feel the wrongness of it in their bones. Maya's bomb was nearly ready, but she was running out of life force to complete the modifications. "The explosion will create a dimensional fold," Maya explained, her voice barely above a whisper as her body continued to age. "It should collapse local space-time and trap the hunger in a pocket dimension, but the explosion will take everything in a 50-kilometer radius with it." Tom looked at his dying friends, at the creature that had once been Alex, at the cosmic horror pressing down on them from above. "How long do we have?" "Minutes," Maya replied. "Maybe less." Tom grabbed Kate's hand, feeling how cold and frail it had become, as she continued to sacrifice her life, forced to power the weapons. "The shuttle. We run for the shuttle now while Rob's shields still hold." Kate looked back at Maya, who was hunched over the bomb's control mechanism, her hair now completely white and her movements slow with age. "We can't leave her." "She won't come," Tom said gently. "Look at her. She knows this is the only way." Maya looked up from her work, and for a moment, her aged face was illuminated by a smile that reminded them of the brilliant young engineer she had been. "Go," she said. "I need to see this through. Someone has to make sure the dimensional fold forms correctly." Above them, the being that was Alex Kethmore engaged the hunger in a battle that transcended physical reality. They fought with weapons made of pure will and shields forged from sacrificed memories. The very air around them crackled with energy as two cosmic forces clashed, reality bending and breaking under the strain of their conflict. Tom and Kate made a desperate sprint through the collapsing tomb. The corridors were reshaping themselves as the dimensional stress increased, and they had to navigate by instinct as much as by sight. Behind them, they could hear Maya calling out modifications to the bomb settings, her voice growing weaker with each word. They reached the shuttle just as the tomb's outer walls began to phase in and out of existence. Tom threw Kate into the pilot's seat and began the emergency startup sequence, thankful that Rob had left the systems in standby mode. Through the shuttle's rear viewport, they could see the final moments of the battle. The being that had been Alex was pouring everything it had into a psychic assault on the hunger, its form becoming increasingly transparent as it burned through both human and alien life force. Maya appeared at the control room window, her hand hovering over what they assumed was the detonation switch. She looked at them one last time and mouthed the words, "Tell Earth," before pressing her palm to the crystal. The explosion that followed was unlike anything physics could explain. It wasn't just a blast of energy. but a fundamental restructuring of space-time itself. They watched through the shuttle's shielded viewport as Pluto literally folded in on itself, taking the tomb, the hunger, and everything else in the immediate area into a dimensional vortex that defied comprehension. Their shuttle was caught in the shockwave and thrown through space like a leaf in a hurricane. Systems failed one by one as they careened away from what had once been Pluto, following a trajectory that Rob would have been proud of if he had lived to see it. They crashed on Charon, Pluto's largest moon, with barely enough power to activate the emergency beacon. As they lay in the wreckage of their shuttle, they looked back through a crack in the viewport to see where Pluto had been. There was nothing there now but a swirling vortex of distorted space-time, a scar in reality that pulsed with its own dark light. The dimensional prison had reformed, trapping the hunger once again in its cosmic cage, but the cost had been enormous. The being that had been Alex and Kethmore was gone, sacrificed to maintain the prison's integrity. Maya was gone, her life force exhausted in the creation of the dimensional bomb. Rob was gone, aged to death while activating the tomb's defenses. Of their crew of 12, only Tom and Kate remained. Rescue came 3 weeks later, when Earth finally received their automated distress signal. The official debriefing was held in a secure facility buried deep under the Colorado mountains, where men in suits with no names asked questions for which they clearly didn't want honest answers. The official report will state that Pluto was destroyed by a massive asteroid impact, the lead investigator said, closing his file with an air of finality. A tragic accident that cost the lives of a brave exploration crew. That's the story we're going with. Kate, who had aged 20 years in the space of a few hours, and now looked like an old woman despite being only 35, stared at the man across the table. "You don't believe us." "I believe you experienced something traumatic," he replied carefully, his words measured and rehearsed. Deep space missions can put tremendous psychological stress on crew members. Isolation, cosmic radiation exposure, sleep deprivation, these factors can create very convincing shared hallucinations. Tom laughed bitterly. Shared hallucinations don't age a person 20 years in 6 hours. Look at Kate's cellular structure. Look at the exotic radiation signatures we're both carrying. Explain that away with psychology. The investigator shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly having no answer for the physical evidence that stood before him. The important thing is that this information remains classified. National security, you understand? After the debriefing, Tom and Kate were released but kept under constant surveillance. They were given new identities, comfortable pensions, and stern warnings about the consequences of speaking publicly about their experiences. 1 year later, they sat in a small cafe in Denver, looking like an elderly couple despite their actual ages. Kate's hair had gone completely white, and her hands shook with a tremor that no amount of medical treatment could cure. Tom walked with a cane, now, his body carrying the phantom weight of the alien weapon that he had briefly wielded. "Do you ever regret it?" Kate asked, stirring her coffee with slow, careful movements. "Do you ever wish we had just ignored the readings and gone home?" Tom stared out the window at the bustling street, watching people go about their lives in blissful ignorance of how close they had come to ceasing to exist. Every day. But then I remember what Kethmore showed us. If we hadn't found the tomb, if we hadn't awakened it, the beacon would never have been triggered. The hunger might have stayed dormant for another 1,000,000 years. Or it might have awakened on its own and found Earth completely unprepared, Kate finished. At least now we know what's out there. Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out a classified file he wasn't supposed to have. The header read, "Deep Space Anomaly Reports. Eyes Only." He spread several photographs across the table between them. "The exploration programs have expanded since our return," he said quietly. "They're using our data to locate other structures. Look at these." The photographs showed structures similar to the tomb they had found. scattered across asteroids and dead worlds throughout the solar system. Each one glowed with that same ominous light, each one covered in the writhing symbols they had learned to fear. "This one was found on Europa 3 months ago," Tom said, pointing to a particularly large structure embedded in the moon's ice. "The exploration team made contact with the surface, but they've gone silent. Mission Command lost all communication 48 hours ago." Kate picked up another photograph showing a crystalline formation on an asteroid in the Kuiper Belt. "And this one?" "Discovered last week. They're sending a manned mission next month." Tom's voice was heavy with dread. "They're not listening to our warnings. They think they can control what they find." Kate studied the images with the eye of someone who had seen too much. "These aren't random, are they? The placement, the distribution, throughout the solar system, it's deliberate." "A containment network," Tom agreed. "Keth Moore wasn't the only guardian. The Zephyrians had multiple failsafes, multiple prisons scattered throughout space, and were systematically finding and opening every one of them." He pulled out another set of documents, these ones marked with even higher security classifications. According to these reports, there have been incidents at 14 different sites in the past year. Equipment failures, communication blackouts, entire teams disappearing without explanation. "They're covering it up," Kate said. "They're trying to, but the incidents are getting larger, harder to explain away. There was an industrial accident on Titan last month that left a crater visible from Earth-based telescopes. No industrial facility on Titan was big enough to cause that kind of destruction." Kate pushed the photographs away, unable to look at them any longer. "How long before they wake something they can't put back to sleep?" Before Tom could answer, their conversation was interrupted by an emergency alert on every phone, television, and radio in the cafe. The president's voice filled the air, speaking from the Oval Office with barely concealed panic. "My fellow Americans and citizens of the world. At approximately 3:47 Eastern Standard Time today, we lost contact with the research station on Europa. Our last transmission from the facility indicated they had made a significant archaeological discovery." Tom and Kate exchanged a look of pure horror. "While we work to re-establish communication with our brave scientists," the president continued, "I want to assure the public that there is no immediate threat to Earth. As a precautionary measure, we are implementing increased security protocols for all space-based operations." The broadcast was cut short by technical difficulties, but the subtext was clear to anyone who knew how to read. Between the lines, something had gone wrong on Europa, something significant enough to prompt a presidential address. Tom's secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Report to facility immediately. All available consultants needed for emergency briefing." "They want us back," Tom said, showing Kate the message. Kate looked at her reflection in the cafe window, an old woman trapped in a middle-aged body, carrying the weight of cosmic horrors that shouldn't exist. "Do we go? Do we have a choice? If they've awakened another guardian, if they've triggered another beacon, we might be the only ones alive who understand what they're dealing with." 3 hours later, they sat in the same underground facility where they had been debriefed a year ago, surrounded by military personnel and scientists who looked like they hadn't slept in days. The lead investigator who had dismissed their story was notably absent. General Patricia Morrison, a woman whose reputation for pragmatism was legendary in military circles, stood at the head of the conference table. "Dr. Williams, Captain Blake, thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult for you." "What happened on Europa?" Kate asked directly. Morrison activated a holographic display showing Europa's surface. The moon appeared normal at first, but as the image zoomed in, they could see a massive structure rising from the ice, a crystalline tower that spiraled up into space like a cosmic lighthouse. "The exploration team found this structure buried under 2 kilometers of ice," Morrison explained. Initial scans showed it was similar to your findings on Pluto, so Command decided to proceed with caution. Tom leaned forward. Define caution. They established a base camp 5 kilometers from the structure and began remote sensing operations. For 2 weeks, everything went according to protocol. Then, yesterday morning, the structure began to emit energy pulses. The holographic display shifted to show energy readings that spiked off the charts. The pulses originated from deep within the structure and propagated outward in expanding spheres. Each pulse was stronger than the last. Did they try to evacuate? Kate asked, though she already knew the answer. Communication with the base camp was lost during the 3rd pulse. Our last transmission was a video message from Dr. Maya Chen. I'm sorry. I know you specifically requested. We not use that name for our briefings, but that was her actual name. The General activated another display, showing a terrified-looking woman in the environmental suit speaking rapidly into a camera. In the background, they could see the crystalline structure glowing with increasing intensity. Dr. Chen reported that several team members had begun experiencing severe headaches and disorientation after the 1st pulse. By the 2nd pulse, they were receiving what she described as visions of dying stars. The 3rd pulse hit while she was recording. The video showed Dr. Chen suddenly stopping mid-sentence, her eyes widening in terror. Behind her, other team members could be seen collapsing to their knees, clutching their heads. Then, the feed cut to static. We lost all satellite coverage of Europa approximately 6 hours ago, Morrison continued. Every probe we've sent to investigate has suffered immediate system failures upon approaching the moon. Long-range sensors show that the structure is still active, possibly growing. Tom studied the energy readings, his enhanced understanding of alien technology allowing him to interpret patterns that the military scientists might miss. General, you need to evacuate all personnel from the Jupiter system immediately. That's impossible. We have 3 research stations and 2 mining operations in the Jupiter system. Then you need to prepare for the worst, Kate said quietly. What we're seeing here is the activation sequence for a Zephyrian Guardian. The pulses are psychic transmissions meant to test the mental capacity of whoever found the structure. Morrison frowned. Test them for what? To see if they're suitable hosts for the Guardian's consciousness, Tom explained. The Zephyrians didn't just leave automatic systems to guard their prisons. They left pieces of themselves, fragments of consciousness that could merge with other sentient beings if necessary. The General's face paled. Are you saying that thing is trying to possess our people? Not possess, Kate corrected. Merge. The Guardian will combine its consciousness with the strongest minds it can find, creating a hybrid being capable of maintaining the prison systems, but the process will fundamentally alter whoever undergoes it. As if summoned by their conversation, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. A junior officer burst into the conference room, his face white with shock. General Morrison, we're receiving a transmission from Europa. Put it through immediately. The main display flickered to life, showing a figure in a damaged environmental suit standing in what looked like the interior of the crystalline structure. At first, they thought it was Dr. Chen, but as the image cleared, they realized the resemblance was only superficial. The being stood 7 feet tall, its form seeming to shift between human and something else entirely. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that suggested multiple consciousnesses speaking in unison. I am Dr. Maya Chen, and I am Velnus the Eternal, guardian of the 4th seal. We speak as one to deliver a warning that your species must heed. General Morrison leaned forward. Dr. Chen, are you all right? What is your status? The hybrid being tilted its head, an unnaturally fluid motion that sent chills through everyone watching. Dr. Chen is preserved within our consciousness, General Morrison. Her knowledge, her memories, her essence remain intact, merged with something far older and more powerful. What happened to the rest of the team? Morrison demanded. They were not compatible with the merging process. Their consciousness was too rigid, too limited to contain the knowledge of the Zephyrians. They have been preserved in crystal matrices, where they dream of times before the hunger's birth. Tom stepped forward. Velnas, we know about the prison network. We found Keth Moore on Pluto and helped him contain the hunger. Why are you revealing yourself now? The hybrid's attention focused on Tom with an intensity that made him step back. Keth Moore the last. Yes, we felt his sacrifice echo across the dimensions. His containment held, but at great cost. The network grows weaker with each guardian that falls. Then, why don't you return to dormancy? Kate asked. Why expose yourself? Because dormancy is no longer an option, Velnas replied, its dual voice filled with ancient despair. Your species has discovered 17 prison sites in the past year. At 14 of those sites, you have awakened the Guardians. The network that has held for 10 million years is beginning to fail. The display shifted to show a star chart with dozens of blinking red points scattered throughout the solar system. Each point represented a prison site, and more than half were pulsing with an ominous light. Each time you awaken a Guardian, you thin the barriers between dimensions, Velnas continued. Each time you force us to merge with your people, you weaken our ability to maintain the seals. The hunger grows stronger with every breach in its prison. General Morrison's face had gone ashen. What are you telling us? That we need to stop all deep space exploration? We are telling you that your species stands at a crossroads, Velnas replied. Continue your current path, and within a year, you will awaken something that cannot be contained. The hunger will break free, and your reality will join the countless others it has devoured. Then what do you propose? Tom asked. The hybrid being seemed to consider the question, its form flickering between human and alien characteristics. There is another way. The Guardians can be permanently awakened and linked together, creating a network of conscious barriers instead of automated prisons. But this would require willing volunteers from your species, individuals prepared to undergo the merging process and live as hybrids for eternity. Kate shook her head. The psychological cost alone would be enormous. You're talking about sacrificing human consciousness to power a cosmic prison system. Better that than the alternative, Velnas said simply. Would you rather save your humanity and lose your reality? Before anyone could respond, new alarms began sounding. A communications officer rushed into the room with a report that made everyone's blood run cold. General, long-range sensors are detecting massive spatial distortions near the edge of the solar system. Something is moving through dimensions toward us at incredible speed. Tom felt his enhanced hearing pick up a sound that the others couldn't detect, a low thrumming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was the same sound they had heard on Pluto, just before the hunger began to emerge. It's too late, he whispered. We've awakened too many Guardians. The network is failing. Velnas's image on the screen flickered as the Europa structure began to pulse with increased intensity. The seals are breaking. We will do what we can to reinforce them, but without more Guardians, without more merged consciousnesses to power the network, the barriers will not hold. General Morrison stood, her military training taking over despite the cosmic scale of the threat they faced. How long do we have? Hours, perhaps less. The hunger has been patient for eons, but now it senses weakness. It will not be denied again. The display suddenly changed to show real-time images from deep space telescopes. At the edge of the solar system, space itself was rippling like water, and through those ripples something vast and dark was pressing against reality. Tom looked at Kate, seeing his own despair reflected in her prematurely aged features. All those people we could have saved if we'd just left that damn tomb alone. Kate took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her frail appearance. No, Tom. If we hadn't found it first, someone else would have eventually. At least now Earth has some warning. some chance to prepare. Prepare for what? Morrison asked. How do you fight something that can unmake reality itself? Velnus's voice carried a note of grim determination. You don't fight it, General. You contain it, and that requires sacrifice on a scale your species has never imagined. The hybrid being raised its hands, and suddenly the air in the conference room filled with images, scenes of possible futures, some of hope and others of unimaginable horror. They saw Earth transformed into a crystalline garden where human-alien hybrids tended to cosmic forces beyond comprehension. They saw vast networks of consciousness spanning the galaxy, with humanity serving as willing partners in an eternal vigil against cosmic chaos. And they saw the alternative, reality unraveling like a tapestry pulled apart by invisible hands, stars going out one by one, existence itself being consumed by an intelligence that viewed the universe as nothing more than food. Choose quickly, Velnus said, its form beginning to fade as the Europa structure's energy output reached critical levels. The hunger approaches and the seals will not hold much longer. Your species must decide. Will you sacrifice your individual humanity to preserve collective existence? Before anyone could answer, the facility's main power went out, plunging them into emergency lighting. Through the walls, they could hear the sound of reality itself beginning to crack. The choice that would determine the fate of all existence hung in the air like a prayer, waiting for someone brave enough to answer. In the darkness, Tom felt Kate squeeze his hand tighter. Outside, among the stars that had seemed so distant and peaceful just days before, humanity's first cosmic war was about to begin. And somewhere in the void between galaxies, an ancient hunger was finally, inevitably, coming home.